In the heart of the barren Egyptian desert, nestled between forgotten dunes and long-abandoned temples, lies a tomb that few dare to speak of. This tomb, buried deep beneath the sands of time, has been the subject of whispered tales for centuries. Legends say that within its stone walls rests a mummy unlike any other, mummy cursed to scream for eternity, its soul trapped in torment, seeking release. In the summer of 1923, a group of archaeologists from the University of Cambridge, led by the ambitious Dr. Emily Carter, embarked on an expedition to uncover this tomb. Driven by the promise of fame and fortune, they ignored the warnings of the local villagers, dismissing their fears as mere superstition. But as they would soon discover, some legends are born from truths too terrible to imagine. The expedition began like any other, with high spirits and a sense of adventure. Dr. Carter, a woman in her early 30s, had spent years studying ancient Egypt. Her passion for the subject was matched only by her determination to make a groundbreaking discovery. The team, consisting of 7 members, including Dr. Carter, her trusted colleague Dr. James Thompson, and a group of eager graduate students, set up camp near the site where they believed the tomb to be located. For weeks, they dug tirelessly, battling the relentless heat of the desert sun. Just as hope began to wane, one of the students unearthed a stone tablet inscribed with hieroglyphs. The tablet spoke of a cursed tomb belonging to a high priest named Neferu, who had been buried alive for committing an unspeakable crime against the gods. Excitement surged through the camp as the team realized they were on the brink of discovering something truly extraordinary. With renewed vigor, they continued their excavation, eventually uncovering the entrance to the tomb. It was sealed with a massive stone door, covered in inscriptions warning of a curse that would befall anyone who dared to enter. Ignoring the warnings, Dr. Carter and her team pried open the door, revealing a dark passageway that led deep into the earth. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay, and a sense of unease settled over the group. But driven by their desire for fame, they pressed on, descending into the depths of the tomb. The passageway led to a vast chamber, its walls adorned with ancient carvings depicting scenes of ritual and sacrifice. In the center of the chamber stood a stone sarcophagus, covered in dust and cobwebs. It was here that the mummy of Neferu lay undisturbed for centuries. As the team approached the sarcophagus, they felt a chill in the air. Despite the oppressive heat of the desert outside, Dr. Carter hesitated for a moment, her instincts screaming at her to turn back, but her curiosity and ambition overpowered her caution. With a nod to Dr. Thompson, she signaled for the others to help her open the sarcophagus. The stone lid was heavy, and it took all their strength to lift it. As the lid was removed, a foul stench filled the chamber, causing several of the team members to gag. Inside, they found the mummy of Neferu, wrapped in tattered linen, its face contorted in a grotesque scream. The eyes, though hollow, seemed to stare directly at them, as if the mummy were still alive. For a moment, the chamber was silent, the air thick with tension. Then, without warning, a low, guttural sound echoed through the tomb. It started as a whisper, barely audible, but grew louder and more intense, until it became a scream that reverberated through the stone walls. The sound was unlike anything they had ever heard, an otherworldly wail, filled with pain and despair. The team froze in terror, their eyes wide with fear. Dr. Carter, struggling to maintain her composure, ordered the others to document the find and prepare the mummy for transport. But as they moved to follow her instructions, the scream grew louder, more insistent, filling their minds with a sense of impending doom. In the days that followed, the team worked to document their discovery. They carefully photographed the sarcophagus, translated the hieroglyphs, and took samples for further analysis. But the eerie scream that had filled the tomb on that first day continued to haunt them. It echoed in their minds, even when they were miles away from the tomb, disrupting their sleep and filling their dreams with nightmarish visions. Dr. Carter was the first to notice the changes. Her colleagues, once filled with excitement and camaraderie, became distant and irritable. Tensions ran high as equipment began to malfunction and strange accidents plagued the camp. Dr. Thompson, normally a rational and calm man, started to lose his grip on reality. He claimed to see shadows moving in the corners of his vision, and he heard whispers that no one else could. One night, as the team gathered around the campfire, discussing the day's findings, the conversation took a dark turn. Dr. Thompson, his eyes wild with fear, recounted a nightmare he had experienced the previous night. In his dream, he was in the tomb, standing before the sarcophagus. The mummy's scream filled the chamber, and as he looked down, he saw his own reflection in the mummy's face. It was as if he had become one with the cursed priest, trapped in an eternity of suffering. The others dismissed his story as a product of stress and exhaustion. But deep down, they all knew something was terribly wrong. The curse of the screaming mummy had taken hold, and there was no escape. As the days turned into weeks, the situation grew worse. The scream became a constant presence, a background noise that they could not escape. The once enthusiastic graduate students became paranoid and withdrawn, their eyes hollow and haunted. They spoke in hushed tones about the curse, about how they were all doomed to suffer the same fate as Neferu. Dr. Carter, desperate to keep her team together, threw herself into her work. She spent long hours in the tomb, studying the hieroglyphs and searching for a way to break the curse. But the more she delved into the ancient texts, the more she realized the hopelessness of their situation. The hieroglyphs told the story of Neferu, a high priest who had once held great power in the kingdom. He was a man consumed by ambition, willing to do anything to achieve immortality. In his quest for eternal life, he committed a great sacrilege. He attempted to steal the life force of the gods themselves. But the gods, angered by his arrogance, condemned him to a fate worse than death. He was buried alive, his soul cursed to scream for eternity, trapped between the world of the living and the dead. And anyone who disturbed his rest would share in his torment. Dr. Carter's hands trembled as she read the final lines of the text. She had brought this curse upon her team, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut, and for the first time in her life she felt truly helpless. The curse's grip tightened with each passing day. The team was falling apart, their minds unraveling as the scream burrowed deeper into their psyches. One by one they succumbed to madness. Dr. Thompson, once her closest ally, was the first to break. He wandered into the desert one night, driven mad by the whispers that plagued his mind. His body was never found. The graduate students fared no better. One was found dead in his tent, his face frozen in a scream that mirrored the mummy's own. Another disappeared into the tomb, leaving behind only a trail of blood and torn linen bandages. The remaining members of the team were too terrified to leave their tents, cowering in fear as the scream grew louder, more insistent. Dr. Carter knew that the end was near. With only 2 members of her team left, she made a final, desperate decision. She would perform the ancient ritual to reseal the tomb, hoping that it would be enough to appease the vengeful spirit and end the curse. Armed with the knowledge she had gleaned from the hieroglyphs, Dr. Carter gathered the necessary items for the ritual: sacred oils, incense, and a knife made of pure gold. She descended into the tomb alone, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the darkness seemed to close in around her as she made her way to the sarcophagus. As she stood before the mummy, the scream filled her mind, drowning out all other thoughts. It was as if the cursed priest were inside her head, his agony becoming her own. But she pressed on, lighting the incense and anointing the mummy's body with the sacred oils. With trembling hands, she raised the golden knife and began the incantation, her voice barely a whisper. The chamber trembled as she spoke the ancient words, and for a moment it seemed as if the curse would be lifted. But as she uttered the final line, a cold hand grasped her wrist, stopping her in mid-sentence. Dr. Carter looked down in horror to see the mummy's hand clutching her arm, its hollow eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The scream intensified, filling the chamber with a deafening roar. The ground shook violently, and the walls began to crack, threatening to collapse around her. In that moment, Dr. Carter realized the truth. In that moment, Dr. Carter realized the truth. The curse was not meant to be broken. The gods had condemned Neferu for all eternity, and anyone who dared to interfere was doomed to share in his torment. There was no ritual, no incantation that could undo what had been done. The only escape was death, and even that might not be enough. As the tomb began to collapse, Dr. Carter struggled to free herself from the mummy's grip, but its hold was unrelenting. Fueled by centuries of rage and despair, the chamber filled with dust and debris as the walls crumbled around her, the earth swallowing the tomb that had remained hidden for so long. In her final moments, Dr. Carter felt a strange sense of peace. She had been driven by ambition, by the desire to make a name for herself, but now she understood the true cost of her pursuit. She had disturbed something that was never meant to be found, and in doing so, she had unleashed a horror that could not be contained. The last thing she heard was the screaming, an unending wail of anguish that seemed to come from the very bowels of the earth. It was the scream of Neferu, the high priest who had sought immortality and found only eternal suffering. And now she too would join him in that endless torment. The tomb collapsed entirely, burying Dr. Carter and the mummy beneath tons of sand and stone. The desert reclaimed what was once lost, the sands shifting to cover any trace of the excavation. The village nearby, once buzzing with rumors of the strange foreign archaeologists, fell silent, as if the desert itself had absorbed their tale. Years passed, and the world moved on, forgetting the names of Dr. Emily Carter and her ill-fated team. The discovery of Neferu's tomb became a distant memory, a footnote in the annals of archaeology. The curse of the screaming mummy faded into legend, a story told by locals to frighten tourists and children. But the desert remembers. Beneath the shifting sands, the tomb still lies, sealed once more by the very forces that had opened it. And deep within, in the darkness where no light reaches, the mummy of Neferu remains, its mouth frozen in that eternal scream. They say that on certain nights, when the wind howls through the desert, you can hear it the faint echo of a scream carried on the breeze. It's a sound that chills the blood, a reminder that some things are best left undisturbed. And so, the tale of the screaming mummy lives on, a warning to those who seek to unearth the secrets of the past. For there are some tombs that should never be opened, some curses that can never be broken.